Cool. Thanks, guys, for coming today. I really appreciate it. All bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and so excited. You guys sound great. Like Adam said, my name is James. I'm from Denver, and I run an immersive theater company called The Exposure Project. And I was asked to present this at ASU, and I've been working on this for a while. But this, basically today, what I want to talk to you guys a little bit about is what's called the Scalability of Trust business model. And this is a model that I've been working on for the last handful of years, a little bit since before the pandemic, that basically is a way to utilize and create demand and systemic change and policy change in favor of artists and artist design and what we do. Where this stems from and what this came from, when we talk about minimalistic immersive experiences, do you guys know what immersive theater is? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, cool. So this, so to give context before we jump into anything. So as a creator, what I do is what's called immersive theater. And immersive theater is basically interactive theater that allows the audience to be centered in the performance and gives them agency within the performance to create some sort of impact. So if you guys are to go somewhere instead of watching a show on stage, you are actually going to walk in and participate within the show and the experience that it creates. These types of theater works are mostly like if you think of like a Meow Wolf experience when you go type of there, or you see a lot of these experiences in Los Angeles that are like related to IPs. The Hunger Games, or not the Hunger Games, what's that show on Netflix right now? Squid Games. Squid Games, I don't know if you guys have seen that like live action Squid Games that you can play. That's like an immersive experience. So it's something that you're involved in, you're taking agency and action to do that. So my company and what we do is we actually explore those concepts in these very minimalistic ways. So instead of looking at spectacle, we look at ways of how we explore the idea of agency within work and how do we create those in very, very intimate experiences. So we look at storytelling, technology, magical realism, and all of these different elements to create something really interesting for it that's going to impact a little bit about what we talk about today. So before we begin into that, I appreciate you guys all being here. So we're going to play a game, which I'm very, very excited. This is a get to know you game. I know you're all going to hate this. I hate them too. That's why I'm doing it to you, because I am in this role now. So it's going to be super fun. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take this little piece of paper, and I'm going to throw this over here to you. And what you're going to do, great. This is why I went into theater and not into sports. So what I'm going to do for you, and then I'll talk a little bit about myself after that too. I want you to say your name, go ahead and give me your pronouns, and then I want you to not, I don't want you talking about anything in school. Let's see, what am I going to ask you? Give me your favorite sandwich since we're around lunchtime, and we'll use that as your going off point. So go ahead. Nice. Kieran, you have the piece of paper in your hand with you right now. I want you to stand up. You're the last person, so you get to be the last one that does this. Now, in front of you, you're going to see on that table a paper lined 1, 2, and 3, yeah? I want you to take that crumbled piece of paper you have in there, and you're going to drop it onto one of those. Now, Kieran, did you know you were going to do this? Did you have any idea what's going on right now? Great, this is what makes it special. What I want you to do is just take that crumpled piece of paper, put it on 1, 2, or 3. Now again, mind you guys, this could have stopped with anybody. So that's the one you want to go with. Be positive. You can change your mind if you want. You're going to commit to it? Okay. That whiteboard behind you, will you flip it around? Go ahead and sit down. By the way, guys, yeah, I'm a magician. I don't know if I told you that kind of feeling. Cool. So, my background and my start of where I got into this was I started as a magician, so I worked professionally as a magician for the last 10 years, primarily in Denver, but I traveled between LA and New York, working on shows and basically being hired for private work to kind of do some of the work with that. About 5, 6 years ago, I got the theater kick again, so I wanted to get back into theater, but I wanted to do something different with it. So I wanted to combine the elements of magic and that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you see something like that with more experiential kind of like creator, higher end fine art stuff. So that's where it entered into immersive theater. Now, immersive theater is really cool because it's what we do is a couple different types of tools of like site-specific work and work that's not traditional theater venues. So we get to play in a lot of the things. However, working on this work, I ran into a bunch of problems that really frustrated me, and I was like always constantly figuring out like, why do these shows at the end of them feel like the most stressful things that we've ever done, and why do we always feel like we're losing money? And I wanted to figure out a way to address that and kind of fix that issue itself. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was we wanted to identify what makes this type of work so challenging and what were some of the challenges that we're running into. And it's not just the shows that I was producing or shows that I was participating in. We see this consistently, that there's a consistent number of problems that we're seeing happen in immersive work that we need to figure out how to be able to address and develop. So what we did is we looked at the problem, we identified a potential solution of how to do this, we tested this scenario to see if it worked, and we've now consistently and repeatedly been able to test this thing to start developing some policy and systemic changes in Denver, Colorado that are going to work for it. So today what we're going to do is basically give you an overview of all of that and then kind of share with you guys a little bit of some examples of how that works. How many of you are still in school right now? I'm assuming all of you? So. Okay, how many of you want to do weird, cool stuff when you get out of college? Okay, don't be shy, like. All right, cool. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the problem. We're going to talk about this scalability of trust model. We're going to then put on an immersive experience with you guys all in the room together and talk a little bit about how that works. And then we'll talk about what these next steps are and what we're going to look at. Okay, so first, one of the things is and I'm going to introduce you guys to some language that we use as well, so feel free to stop me if something doesn't make sense so we can clarify that. But in immersive theater, what we talk about is the idea of activation or activating unused spaces. So one of the things that we do as theater work is we love to go into really weird places and then activate them in non-traditional ways. That means going into restaurants and turning them into a fairy tale world. That means going into an abandoned, empty meatpacking plant and then turning it into a place where you go and talk to ghosts from the early 1920s. You know, it's really creating and turning these like unused spaces into these really cool things, right, that people want to come and interact and play with and do all that stuff. However, cities don't see unused spaces as creative artistic places. They see them as tax rebates and all these other like political issues that we don't want to deal with, which makes it difficult to be able to use these spaces. So as artists, we see the potential in a lot of these spaces, but we always get pushback from governments, from local private businesses, private owners, and things like that that don't allow us to actually play with the stuff. So when we talk about site-specific, what we're talking about is, again, that theater being done in non-traditional spaces. So a lot of those spaces can be anything. And these are some of the examples of work that I've done before. So I've done it in a meatpacking plant, in a library, in a warehouse, retail store, cafes, parking garages. We've actually done shows in people's individual apartments and bedrooms. There's a very, very famous show called Broken Bone Bathtub that's literally done in your bathtub at your apartment. So my friend Savan does it. It's absolutely amazing. And these are some of the spaces that I've worked in. So these are empty. So that iMac is an empty abandoned building that used to be an old cheese testing and manufacturing site that literally has, I think, 2 outlets that work inside of it in an empty abandoned building. Onward was a retail store that we were in. That was a hotel. And then that is another empty abandoned location that we were working on for a project itself. So you can see not a lot of infrastructure in there, but a lot of potential of movement and space and things we can play with. But there are a lot of problems to using these spaces. And we're going to talk a little bit about those challenges. So if we think about like different spaces, right? And if I want to go in as an artist and create something in there, what do you think would be a challenge to going into that space? Okay. So what we're going to do is for the rest of this presentation, we're going to split you guys up into 2 separate groups. Okay. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to start over here, and you're going to start at 1. Great. So the 1s are going to go over here, the 2s are going to go over here. You guys are going to move. And we're going to split you guys up into 2 different groups. The 1s are going to be our artists. So you guys, for here on out, are going to assume the role of being an artist. So if you think about how an artist would think about the use of a space, what would you do creatively to create that, and what would you want to do with it? Number two, you guys are going to be a business owner. So I want you to think about if someone was to approach you, right, this is the mindset I want you to be in, is if someone was to approach you about wanting to do something into your space, what would be some of the concerns and challenges you would think of, right? Make sense? Cool. All right, what I want you guys to do is I want you to think about this is that from this perspective, if an artist wants to come in and use your site, what would be some of the challenges to that? So over here, you guys can pick out a representative to use the whiteboard. I'll have you guys do the representative, and I'll give you guys like 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes to do that, okay? Cool, all right, so go. So this is what we're gonna do. So this is really interesting, and I'm very, very excited. I don't want you guys to see these yet. Actually, let's do this now. So real quick, we'll start with the artists, because I know you guys were a little bit off. But give me some of the conversation that you guys were having, or like the bullet points of what came out of that real quick. Okay, so marketing, like how you make it like sellable, essentially, is what you're looking at. What were some of the like problems, like if you could just say them like specifically, like what were some of the problems you guys started to think about? Okay, cool, great, that's great. That's really, really good. Okay, you guys, coming up from a business approach, I see that you basically are saying that you were IKEA, which is a great example. We've been trying to get like IKEA shows for a long time now. What were some of the concerns, like real quick bullet points that you guys came up with? Great, great, great stuff. And that's pretty much what, when we started to ask people about some of the issues that would come up, that's exactly what both of you were talking about, is exactly those concerns that were coming up. That we saw from this. From the creator's perspective, what we saw a lot of people saying that their major challenges and issues to using these spaces came down to two specific issues, money and venues. Do we have the money to actually create the infrastructure and initial budget to create one of these events that we're going to do? And then the venue, oh, I forgot to update that, and it's still in Spanish from the stock template. Don't worry about that. From the venue perspective is how do we get the venue to agree to this type of project when we have so many things to overcome? And this is a really good example of what happens is you as the artists don't really know where to start from, right? So you guys were having these conversations that were a little bit kind of higher end, bigger, conceptual, and the businesses immediately have to start thinking about their bottom line. So we noticed that a lot from the artists when we went to venues that we would have that challenge. From the venue, the two issues that we noticed the most was that they had to think about it from, like I said, their bottom line. So they have to think about what is it, how is this going to impact their revenue? How is this going to impact their workflow, people coming into their space? And then how inconvenient is it going to be in their space? What are they going to have to compromise from their processes to be able to do that? And this can vary based on the venue that you're working with, from people who are very passionate and particular about how their space is and very protective of it, to also corporate businesses that just don't understand how to use the space outside of the structure that they built with it. However, when we started to dig deeper into all of this, we found out that there was what was really going on was not necessarily that people were in disagreement of how to use the space, it was just that we didn't understand how these two types of use of the space can work particularly together. And where we saw the biggest challenges come from was the goals, the outcomes, and the potential use of a space. Even though we all wanted to use the space and achieve something inside of it, it felt like there was a disconnect that we found from it. And so what we found out is that there's actually a deeper problem going on beyond just revenue and budget changes. What's actually going on is that there is a disconnect in a common language that businesses and artists can share together to understand each other's visions and how they work unilaterally together, as well as there's policies and systems already built in place that do not favor and benefit artists, which makes it more difficult for us to play along in these corporate uses of space. A really good example is that I just recently did a presentation with Arts and Venues in Denver. It was a talk back. So we had 4 artists go on stage, they talk back. We had about 30 people in the audience at this beautiful venue to be able to come into. Super great. I had to go through the paperwork. The paperwork process I had to go through was the exact same paperwork process that touring Broadway theater shows have to go through. So even though it was a talk-back conversation we were having within the building, I had to provide car insurance, I had to provide building insurance, and I had to provide all of these other things that made absolutely no sense for it. And me as an individual artist, that makes it extremely challenging for me to feel safe and comfortable to be able to use these spaces. So what we started to look at is what so we had to start thinking about this in a completely different way. If the challenge is a common language and having systems that are not going to allow us to use space, what do we actually need to change? What do we want to see happening in these spaces? How do we want to make those happen more? And how do we make those policies be a little bit more flexible or benefiting or in favor of what artists are creating? And the solution that we started to look at came from this book, which is called The Purple Cow. And if you guys haven't read this, I highly recommend adding it to your reading list. It's a very, very small book by Seth Godin, who's a great guy that writes and talks a lot about like kind of demand and sales and all that type of stuff. But in the book, he talks a little bit about what's called a bottom-up approach, so creating customer demand to force changes to happen. And the example in the book that's always stuck with me ever since I was a kid in college was this concept of that there was a particular cookie brand that wanted their cookies inside of a grocery store that didn't carry it. Their solution to get them in there was they actually started doing flyers of discount codes and promos outside of the grocery store. So it's like they had like a 2-for-1 promo code come from this cookie company. But the cookies weren't inside the grocery store, so people would go inside the grocery store, they would demand that these cookies, right, because they get the discount on it, which forced the grocery store to start carrying the cookie chain. That has always sat with me in this really interesting way of that the brand didn't go and badger the grocery store, didn't try to force them to comply with anything. They used the natural organic systems of supply and demand to leverage that situation, which led us to how do we apply that as artists, like trying to think about that. And the thing that we developed and started to think about is we can't be the ones that ask for this change. We have to ask for other people to create that change for us. So we created and designed and developed this idea of stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders and who are the ones that actually have control of these situations? Who are the ones that can actually change these situations? And how can we get them to be on our side so that it's easier for us to create? And how do we develop those skills to then create those production opportunities and create in partnership with businesses instead of one side using the other? Great example that we just, that you guys, I hope you're starting to see those patterns come up, is that you guys wanted to utilize the space without thinking about how it's really going to impact the day-to-day of the business, and the business doesn't realize that that could potentially create more revenue and drive-through traffic for them. So this is where the scalability of trust business model comes into play. This model we created roughly about 4 or 5 years ago. We've been formalizing it over the last handful of years with some case studies and development with it. But what this is it is a tool to develop empathy with your stakeholders so that they can actually create that systemic change for you instead of you trying to demand it. The system is basically a conversational tool, and it allows us to basically develop relationships with individual stakeholders and convert them eventually from partners into advocates for your systems and programs. By starting small and building these one-on-one relationships, we can then scale that model up, not because we're the ones asking for it, but because our peers are the ones that are doing it. And what we found time and time again is that people are more likely to trust the person that's at the same level as them rather than someone that's below them. So as an artist, right, we're individuals that can't afford the luxury of being inside of these like governmental conversations or being in rooms with like certain millionaires, you know, those types of things. However, if another millionaire who's my champion goes in and starts talking to this person, it opens up tons more conversations and opportunities for us to grow. So the system is split into 6 steps, and it's very, very simple, and it's all based on basically like sales funnel and sales needs. You identify a partner, you develop a relationship with that partner to understand each other's needs, you educate your stakeholders on the opportunities of what's going on, as well as identify any of the language gaps between you and your stakeholders. You develop smaller scale work that has lower risk and higher reward potential to build the trust with them. You create a mutually beneficial business plan that will both benefit you guys revenue-wise or whatever problems you're addressing. And after everything works out successfully, you then convert that partner into one of your advocates who will go on to continually champion for your work and whatever that it is that you want to do. Make sense? Okay. I tried to skim it down and make it as simple as possible. So the way that it works is that what we found time and time again, and a lot of issues that you see, is that artists are always talking about how they need more money, and we're always moaning about the grants aren't giving us enough, and then when you go apply for a grant, they're like, we want to see your revenue for the last 5 years as a nonprofit organization, and we need your LLC, and blah, 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 blah. I'm an individual artist. I don't have any of that stuff, so there's a lot of opportunities that I lose out on, and a lot of opportunities that aren't open up to me. But me coming in, and the joke I always look is I'm like semi-homeless and elegantly disheveled, so imagine me going into Congress and demanding that I get policy change. Like, that's not gonna work, right? And that's a lot of times what we see is this artist coming in and saying, like, I want to be the one that changes this. Can we change this? And you're like, no, we can't change it. However, if the artist creates impact with the audience and business owners, those are the people that are going to go to Congress and say, hey, this isn't working out. We want more of this stuff in our spaces. How do we make that happen? Right? And the businesses are the ones that can foster and change policy. They're the ones that are going to do that because there's an investment opportunity for them to be able to make that work. So what we wanted to do with this business model is remove this top part. Oh, I thought this was a laser. Is it? Okay. So remove this top part that isn't working and ineffective, that we waste a lot of time in as artists, and really focus on where we can actually leverage change and what we can actually do. So as an artist, it's not my job to go and write policy or change stuff. My job as an artist is to create empathy with my audiences that then foster them to take action. So the way that we do that is we develop that through mutual empathy. Mutual empathy is basically the idea of figuring out how we can understand each other's needs, wants, problems, and challenges. But to do that, we need to understand who our stakeholders are. So what I want you guys to do in your different groups is, again, think about this, is that if I wanted to create policy change that benefited an artist, right, so benefited us to be able to add, I don't know, a sleepover immersive experience at IKEA, right? So people can go in and sleep over at IKEA. Who would need to be the people that would have to be part of that? Okay? So this is now, don't think about it as artists, don't think about it as a business, just think about it as yourselves as individuals, and your different tables. Take like 2 or 3 minutes and figure out who do you think would be the stakeholders to make that change happen, or to allow something like that to happen. Are you guys ready? Oh, this is so fun. I listen to your conversations. I'm like, oh, you're almost there. This is great. But not there. OK, cool. So let's start back. We'll start with you guys this time. So give me, who do you think are the stakeholders in this scenario that we developed? Yeah, I love that. That's great. Very, very good. Very, very good. So thinking about it small scale of who you need to directly talk to then get that buy-in. OK, great. From you guys, what did you have? Yeah, that's great. You guys are definitely thinking about it on the right path. And this is exactly what you're looking about is, and one of the things that we're looking at is when we talk about the stakeholders is we talk about who they are. Man, I forgot to this is the wrong presentation I just realized because this is not the edited one. So forget the Spanish. This is all about ice cream. Don't worry about it. But what we have to start thinking about is this idea of the who is involved in all of these different types of conversations and exactly how our relationship is with those people. So when we start thinking about something from both a macro and a micro scale, this is exactly what we want to start thinking about. Who is involved in this conversation? Who is involved in buying in and wanting to do this? What is my relationship with that person? And how do we get to them to make the decisions happen? Right? And you guys were thinking about it exactly right, of like, we have access to the employees, to the managers, to the people there. So how do we start fostering those relationships? But when we talk about policymakers, we also have to think about it from a macro scale too, of the policymakers, of the people who are actually creating and changing the policies, the advocates for anything that's going on creatively or for the businesses, the consumers who will actually be going through the experience as well as the space, and the creators themselves of how we're going to be in those. These are basically the 4 major funnels that every single person is going to be involved into. So some of the conversations I heard about you guys was talking about like the corporate managers and directors of IKEA. It's 100% true of someone who will be involved in this conversation at some point, as well as when we start looking at private versus government or educational partnerships, who are those types of people that will be involved with that too, right? So if we start thinking about it from a funding perspective, if it's an educational grant that you're receiving, how do we create that conversation between IKEA and the educational department or the grant organization you're working with? So this is, again, a great and easy way to kind of funnel in what you're looking at and thinking about what your direct relationship is with those people. And as you can see here, basically the way that this works is that it's both a circular action as well as kind of this like weird connection action. So everything is going to be talking to each other in different ways. What you really want to do is make sure that this conversation is always going in a circle. Starting from you as a creator, and occasionally it might go that you bounce over to talking to a policymaker, or you might start talking to a business owner. But what you want to make sure is that these conversations are constantly moving around. Right? And anything that's happening gets back to you as a creator so that you can go in and address any of those solutions or problems as fast as you can. This model, when we start talking about it, I designed this, when I started playing with this, I was running into a lot of challenges that when we would take over a whole space. So let's assume we did a show in 2019 and we took over what was called the Aurora Fox Theater. And it's this large stage theater with an attached black box theater to it, and we took the whole space over for a couple of months to be able to create a show in it. So it was 8 performers, and we took 30 audience members through this whole entire space. So we had complete control of the space, and it was a Beauty and the Beast / aliens / ghost tour story. I know it doesn't make sense. It still didn't make sense to us when we did the show. But what happened was, when we created this, was it wasn't just getting the theater on board. This theater was an historic landmark. So then we also had to get the Historic Landmark Society to be able to say okay to us to changing and challenging the space. Then we also found out that the space was owned by the government, the local city government. So we had to make sure that they were in the conversations that were happening with that, as well as all of these other people. And it just snowballed into this like hard conversation because we had committed to such a large space that we were stuck, and we had to like have these just like beating at the door conversations that just were super unsustainable and ultimately unsuccessful. And what I found out is that if I went into an individual business and I had a one-on-one conversation with them and showed them something smaller, then this model started to independently create itself on its own. Because that one business owner became the person who started having those conversations for me. And all I had to do was just make really, really good work, and he would become my champion. So the big challenge of what we're looking for and what you have to think about when you start working on site-specific work or non-traditional work is thinking about and identifying that empathy between the different partners and organizations you're working with. You start having to think about what are the goals of each stakeholder. What's their personal investment into creating something like this for you? What are you asking them to change? Is this a major change they need to make to their policy or systems, or is this a minor change they need to make into their space? Does your personal project help them achieve their goals? Do you truly understand what the goals are of the space, the business, the entity, the organization that you're wanting to take over with? And what are you willing to compromise and change in your project to make sure that you can find compromise between the space and the work? A lot of challenges when you have a vision as an artist is you come in with your vision and you want everyone to accommodate that, but you have to remember that you are coming in as a business person, and businesses require those compromises to be able to go to. These conversations are super important for everybody to remember early on. And I think one of the things as artists, we constantly forget about this part when we get so focused on the development and creation of it. So this is like, honestly, if you were looking at anything for this business model, this is the most important part. Okay, so to give you guys an example of how this works, so I have a seance, which is here at the Ampersand Festival if you guys want to come see it. It's called the Final Seance. It's a it's a 45-minute immersive experience where you are invited to join Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as he tries to resurrect Harry Houdini from the grave. The way I designed it was that you can actually pop this up into any space that you want. What I really was hoping for the show is to find and partner with local mansions, ancient old buildings, decrepit spaces, to basically bring the show in, pop up the experience, and then pull it out as fast as I can. The show is for 10 people, and the show is centered specifically for 45 minutes around one table that we bring into the space, and that is the only thing that we actually move and update and change into the space. So very, very small, very quick turnaround, but the thing about it is I can repeat it up to 4 times a night, so that gets 40 people through. Now, I want you to raise your hand, so I want everyone to take the mindset of a business. Let's assume that you guys are all business owners, and I can tell you, I can get 40 people through your space in one night. Raise your hand if you think that that's something beneficial to your business. Some of the other challenges too is that I come into is that people will usually be like, we don't want it accommodated and associating with that kind of like thing, as well as we already have, that's less than the normal flow of traffic that we get on any night. And most of the time I want to do this after hours, and so they go, well, we're open from 9 to 5. Why would you want to do this from midnight to 2 a.m.? Right? So, challenges with this show. I need to make sure that people are on board with the idea of the final seance and not having the branding feel like it's like a disassociation with it. I need to make them feel safe that the space is not going to be utilized in a very compromised or changed way, and that we're going to use it in hours that it's not currently activated to help them motivate to get more customers into it. So what we did for this show to be able to update it and create this is that I partnered with a local business. And we found out that they were basically a high-end fashion shop that was in this really interesting, unique warehouse space in what's called River North, which is our downtown area. I went and talked to the business owners, and I asked them what their potential customer flow base was, what type of customers they had, and what they were looking for, and the challenges of like getting customers into their space. They were a Burning Man specific kind of like holistic, spiritual, kind of like, you know, fruity tooty kind of like venue. They didn't have a lot of people coming into that space, and they wanted to increase the volume of people who were coming in looking at the store. So what we did was I told them that my audience was very similar to what the kind of like identified their particular customer that they wanted to come in. And what I told them was I said, listen, if you help me partner with the space, here's the space that we need to take up. Here's the size of the space that I need to take. I will bring these people in at night with the opportunity of them to be able to see the space as well as purchase items. And we'll give them your contact information for them to come back. I checked in with them a week later after we did the show, and pretty much everybody that came to the space purchased something either the night of, or they purchased something in the following days. And so they got a completely brand new audience base to come in through their space, which then met their needs of wanting to get people to come into the space and met my needs of having an interesting space to use. And what that did was, for me, is by building that relationship with that business owner who was able to see the positive growth of it, I was able to move into a larger space for a larger experience that I had. So last year I did a show called The House of Asterion. And The House of Asterion was a magical realism performance where you were invited to come into a labyrinth. You were invited to come into a labyrinth and release your fears to the world. And we were in a 5,000 square foot space, $10,000 budget, unlimited time, unlimited use in the space. I got 24/7 access, and the reason why I got that when I asked why I was given it was they told me that the business owners trusted me. So the business owners in the area trusted and vouched for me, so they were willing to give me more freedom and flexibility into the use of the space that I had. Whereas if I would have come and just gone in with this show by itself, they told me immediately they would never have said yes to it. The only reason they said yes was because of the relationships and the people that I had built the relationships with. And so you can see this is some of the example of what we did with the space. We took it over, created a bunch of art inside of it, literally painted the whole entire walls, did all the lighting, everything that we could, no questions asked, was able to get complete freedom from that. And that came from me working within the confines of how do I benefit a business to then complete freedom of exploration of what I wanted to do. And again, then from there, what was cool is once we did that show in the space, the art district was so excited about what we were doing that they gave me complete creative and freedom and control to program that space throughout the rest of the year. So we were able to do full parties, full dance parties, everything that I wanted to do creatively. They gave me full and complete trust and freedom to use that space. And again, I asked them, I said, why are you doing this? And they said, because you came into us by understanding our needs, what we're looking for, and how we get the volume of people to come through the space as well. So when we utilize this model of building relationships, what it does is it helps cultivate those relationships with the key decision makers and influencers. It helps us to create a common language so we understand each other's needs, what we're looking for, and how we can identify things. It creates a referral system for future work and opportunities. And it develops mutual benefiting relationships beyond goodwill. A lot of the time, the artists, when they come into a space, they're asking for the space out of pure goodwill, out of the pure goodness of their hearts. But again, we have to recognize that these are businesses, and they have things that they need to accomplish. So how do we as artists utilize our time and space to support those things so that we all can continually moving forward? How do we really leverage and turn these, instead of just like fun little art projects, into something beneficial, both on a financial scale as well as a social and communal scale? And also, it helps you develop a collaborative mentality by understanding what other people's needs are and creating an emotional empathy towards that, so you start creating things that are going to benefit people larger than beyond of what your personal ideas are. I, as an artist, sometimes have disagreements with things that I enjoy doing, but understand that when I make those compromises, we're doing something larger for the community as a whole. So we have a couple of minutes left. So what I want to do with you guys, and again, there's a lot more, so feel free, we'll have time for questions. But what I want to do is I want to try something with you guys real quick. So we're going to try an experience. So I'm sure a lot of you in this room, except for maybe 2 of us, know what mannequin is. I know it. Cool. OK, great. So we're going to put on an immersive show inside of a space. Mannequin is a movie from 1987. It's a seminal classic with Kim Cattrall and Andrew McCarthy, where a mannequin doll comes to life and he falls in love with it after hours. So that's the premise of the show, is we're going to go into a shop after hours, and we're going to put on a show where one of the mannequins comes to life. Fair? Here's the requirements for the experience. This is the venue. Venue is called Onward. It's a 2,000 square foot boutique on Main Street, focused on boutique and finer clothings for holistic tech bros. You know exactly what I'm talking about, which makes me feel great. These are the questions I want you guys to look at. You guys again, venue. You guys again, artists. Venue, I want you to look at what are your financial goals as a business, who is your target audience, what are your priorities, what is sacred in your space, how controlling of the space are you, and what are your hours. Producers, I want you to look at what your financial goals are, who is your target audience, what are your show needs, how much space do you need, how much control of the space do you need, and why is this space important to use? Okay, those are the questions I want you guys to think about. I will give you 5 minutes and then put those up on the whiteboard. Okay, let's wrap it. Whatever thought you're on, let's wrap that up there. Because I have a feeling we could do this for forever. In fact, this is now my new immersive thing. We're gonna do this as a 2-hour workshop from now on. This is gonna be a full thing. All right, great. So what I want to do is, before we get to that, so let's start again with the artists this time. I want you guys to present what you have created. So you'd be bringing in your own stuff to, okay, transform the space. Great. Cool. All right. Flip yours over. Tell them your needs or concerns. So this is really good, and really good conversation to look at. So did you guys think once about them purchasing products in the store? Yeah, that's great. And the other thing too is that, again, this is interesting too, hearing the conversation between the 2 of you, is because even though that you stated you were not going to permanently change the space, as soon as you discussed and said bringing in your own things to transform the space, conversation completely shut down, right? Because that's what you heard.
Well, we've also never worked with you guys before.
Right?
So there's a level of trust.
So this is where this is the beauty of this model, right? This is the beauty of what we're looking at, is even here in just a miniature small example of what we're talking about, you're already seeing where the challenges as artists are coming from in the different conversations that you're having, right? And again, let's assume that I had assigned you guys all roles as different stakeholders, right? Now you all have different responsibilities and investments, and so what you feel is good for the business, you don't, because again, your priorities are different. So how, as artists, are we addressing that in the initial pitches, and how are we bringing something into the space to test and try to make it mutually successful so that you can take over that space? So the questions you have to really think about after seeing everything that was presented is you have to think about, as a venue owner, what questions do you have? What reservations do you have, and how do you articulate those in a good way? What would you need to make you feel comfortable for this opportunity? And what would the producers need to change to make that work? And so those are the questions as artists we have to start thinking about as objections and how we're going to overcome those. We have to take the mindset of whoever we're working with. As producers, a same thing is you have to see about what you're going to do and how you communicate those. Because even though you might be saying the same thing, the language, the verbiage, the tools that you're using to do it are going to be vastly different. So how do we create that common language, and how do we foster that relationship before we get to the actual sales pitch itself? So what we want to think about is a lot of this types of stuff is what's the investment and how do we get through does that throughput help the investment? What are we asking to change? What are we willing to change? Does my project help them achieve their goals? Again, we have to come as artists thinking as we're consultants more than we are actually coming in to perform something that we want. Is it gonna go? Is that it? Oh. Oh, that's all dumb stuff. Okay, cool. So in summary, what I want to tell you guys like this, because again, I wish we had more time to kind of go through this, but I'm hoping that you guys saw a little bit of how this structure and kind of conversation works. And again, there's a lot more that we can talk about with how policy work changes and how this creates the dynamic. But what we really want to do with this model is not worry so much about that. What we want to worry about is the things that we can impact and where as artists we can prioritize our time. So instead of us trying to create and force policy change and wasting time creating art, we should be spending most of our time actually building those audiences, building those relationships with those businesses so that eventually those policymakers can make those changes. And so like a great example of what we're doing in Denver right now is with our arts and venues department is that we used to have a grant system in there for us as artists to be able to use their spaces. Unfortunately, those were all designed for nonprofit organizations and weren't designed for for-profit businesses as well as smaller individual artists like myself. So for the past 3.5 years, we've been working with the head of arts and venues to actually restructure their grant opportunities and their submission program that benefits actual individual artists. Same thing with Denver Center for Performing Arts. We have an entity called Off Center. And Off Center is an organization that's actually being designed and helping utilize non-traditional spaces in Denver and allowing individual artists to be able to use that. So within the next 2 years, I as an individual artist will actually be transforming one of our college campuses into something huge and big. And that was only because we got that was because I've built such a strong relationship with certain advocates in the area that now everybody's a champion and trusting me to take on this project rather than us being in a fight against it. So really what I want you guys to take away from this is this idea of how do we understand each other? How do we really identify what those problems are going to be? And how do we build solutions that are going to benefit everyone at the table? And that's the model. That's basically it. Any questions? Do you guys have any questions on this right now?